Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is January 22nd, 2025, and let's get to the news and updates happening in Ukraine and Russia, shall we? A very brief video today, and I want to talk about Trump. It's a new era that we have entered with the Trump administration now in power of the White House and the United States. And there's been some interesting developments in the last few days, which are very positive for Ukraine, in my opinion, and a confirmation as well of Trump's positioning with regards to the war and which side he's going to take. Again, I need to highlight the fact that Trump is not pro-Ukraine by any means, but he also understands, as I've mentioned multiple times in the past, that Ukraine's defeat equals the defeat of the United States, and the image of Trump will be severely hurt. So I think that message got across within Trump's head, and his advisors and the people in charge of dealing with this war in the Trump administration have voiced that to him, and he understands that fully well. Now you can see that today Trump posted a very interesting and positive, in my opinion, post on Truth Social, pretty much issuing an ultimatum to Putin. And I'm going to read it out to you, not in Trump voice. You can do that in your own head if you want, but I thought this was really interesting. Of course, there's always inaccuracies here whenever Trump tweets something. But either way, I want to read it out to you. So he says, "I'm not looking to hurt Russia. I love the Russian people and always had a very good relationship with President Putin. And this despite the radical left's Russia, Russia, Russia hoax. We must never forget that Russia helped us win the Second World War, losing almost 60 million lives in the process. Correction, these were not Russian lives. These were the lives of multiple different countries that were part of the Soviet Union who were forced into the Soviet Union, including Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic countries, and Central Asian countries, and in the Caucasus as well. So these were not exclusively just 60 million Russian lives. And also, let's not forget, FYI, that the Soviet Union assisted the Nazis in 1939 by invading Poland. And then they got backstabbed. They often forget about that in their history books. But I digress. All of that being said, I'm going to do Russia, whose economy is failing, and President Putin a very big favor. Settle now and stop this ridiculous war. It's only going to get worse. If we don't make a deal, and soon, I have no other choice but to put high levels of taxes, tariffs, and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the United States and various other participating countries." This is really important here as well, because Russia right now is circumventing these sanctions by purchasing components from other countries like Georgia, Kazakhstan, China, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, etc., etc. So Trump acknowledges that these countries are also participating with Russia trying to circumvent these sanctions. He continues, "Let's get this war, which never would have started if I were president, over with. We can do it the easy way or the hard way. And the easy way is always better. It's time to make a deal. No more lives should be lost." 3 exclamation points. So this is clearly an ultimatum to Putin, and it also displays that Trump is looking down at Putin. Yesterday as well, Trump repeated pretty much the same thing, saying that Putin wants to have a talk with me, that it's Putin who wants to have a talk with me, not I want to have a talk with Putin. Again, really putting Putin on the inferior position. And he also understands very clearly through this post that the Kremlin is not acting in good faith. When they're talking about being ready for peace negotiations, they're not really ready when they're pushing maximalist positions, right? Ukraine needs to give up Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, Luhansk, entirely, even territories that Russia still doesn't control, fully demilitarize Ukraine. So Ukraine is essentially rendered without a military. Ukraine never being part of NATO, never being part of the European Union, essentially just, stripping Ukraine and completely naked. And Trump understands that that's not acting in good faith. Russia currently is not presenting any compromise. So this is very good news for Ukraine, in my opinion, because I'm expecting that Russia won't give in, knowing that they're just too proud and stubborn. Being forced by the US to do something would be a betrayal of the core Russian beliefs that they're the dominant ones, that they're the ones dictating this war, that they're going to force everybody on the table, including the United States and NATO, and they're going to be the winners at the end of this story. they're never going to agree to that. I would be very surprised if Putin gives in. And so things will only get worse for Russia, knowing that they will not give in. Trump will continue with heavy sanctions, heavy tariffs, and as he says, taxes on Russia and the participating countries. And also on top of that, we already know that the Ukrainians themselves are doing excellent sanctions of their own. Now, almost on a daily basis, Ukraine is hitting oil depots, refineries. Just the other day as well, Ukraine hit a very significant aviation plant in Smolensk. I shared pictures with you guys on community, YouTube community. And Ukraine continues to do that. What used to be a big major news a year ago now is overlooked because Ukraine does it so frequently, so often in Russia. So things will only get worse for Russia. And economically speaking, there could be a massive crash by the end of this year, knowing that if the US continues with its sanctions, Ukraine continues with its sanctions, Europe as well does what they need to do, the Russian economy could collapse very quickly. And it would happen in a matter of a few months. So you guys can let me know what you think about it, but I think this is a pretty good confirmation that Trump has taken a side, which is definitely more pro-Ukraine than pro-Russia. But again, I need to highlight the fact that Trump has never been an ally of Ukraine. He's going to do everything possible to have Ukraine win. It's just that he wants to make himself seen as a winner, as one that managed to break a deal between Russia and Ukraine and have a peace. Now, let's talk about the other thing. And one of the reasons I think why Russia is not going to give in is because they also have been meeting with Iran, China, and North Korea over the last few days and weeks. And Russia feels like they can still rely on these alliances to continue fighting against Ukraine. So they're not as afraid as they should be. So the good news here is, as stated here by the New York Times, North Korea is going to send some reinforcements to Kursk region within 2 months, according to them. So these are sources in the US defense. The good news here, in my opinion, is that Russia clearly is struggling with recruitment, and its manpower advantage continues to drop. It's clear they would not be turning to North Korea if things were going well. We understand how complicated it is to integrate North Koreans in the Russian military. The cultural language difference alone is a huge, complicated situation, right? And it took Russia months to integrate North Koreans into the Russian military. And they would not have been doing this. I'm very convinced about that. If things were going super well for Russia and they could recruit as many soldiers as they needed, it's clearly not the case. The bad news, as I've mentioned, is that Russia can still rely on North Korean and Chinese support to continue pressuring the Ukraine front line. And as it's indicating here, indicated likely that North Korea is going to send even more troops over the next few months to support their Kursk counteroffensive. So this is why I think that Russia was not going to give in, and Trump will continue pressuring and assisting Ukraine with financial assistance, military assistance, and putting heavy sanctions on Russia. What is the response here? And one thing that I agree with Trump, I don't agree with him often, but I do agree with him that Europe needs to be directly involved with solving this issue. The silver lining with Trump's administration is that they have woken up, I think, Europe, and understanding that they need to take matters into their own hands, and especially with regards to the Ukraine question. They understand very well that this is not just about Ukraine, it's also about European security, as Russia's been threatening not only Ukraine, but the Baltics, Finland, countries in Eastern Europe. And it is in NATO's interest, specifically European countries, in being involved directly in Ukraine with boots on the ground, not just financial and military assistance, but also providing boots on the ground. And what I am suggesting here, as a response to North Korea doubling down and continuing with the transfer of troops to Russia and possibly in Ukraine, is for NATO, if they're serious about peace and a ceasefire, to also transfer their own troops to Ukraine over the next few months and secure right now the peaceful front lines, that is the border between Belarus and Ukraine, Zaporizhia, where there's not a lot of combat ongoing, Kherson region, and also Transnistria. So of course not sending them to the front line where there's heavy clashes in eastern Ukraine, but where there's still a Ukraine presence, where the Ukrainians don't have a choice to keep a presence because they never know what can happen. If we're looking at the map here, you guys can see that there's a huge border right now with Belarus that the Ukrainians still need to manage and defend. You can see that there is presence of Belarusian troops and Russian troops, and you never know. Even though it would be suicidal for them to attack Ukraine from the north, you never can say never at this stage. And so even having some NATO presence here will liberate a few Ukrainian battalions to then focus on stabilizing the eastern Ukraine front line, because that's one of the most important tasks right now for Ukraine, is to stabilize the situation, for Russia to feel like they cannot push any longer, and forcing Russia to start negotiating, because Russia is not going to stop until unless they feel like they're losing momentum. When they feel like they have the momentum, they're not going to stop. Putin is going to continue applying pressure. So NATO needs to be directly involved. You know, it's hard to say, and I know that for a lot of people it's a hard pill to swallow, but you have North Korean troops now involved. Who knows, maybe in the future you could have Iranian troops, Chinese troops helping the Russians. And Ukraine is fighting this by themselves. It's time to be real and allowing the Ukrainians to have a fighting chance against this. So that's my proposition. I think that NATO really needs to consider that. And we're seeing some positive signs with Macron this week talking more about French presence in Ukraine. Of course, the historic alliance between the UK and Ukraine, and possibly seeing the UK transferring some troops to Ukraine and training Ukrainian soldiers in the next few years. Like, I feel like Europe starts to understand that they need to be directly involved as well in Ukraine if they want to have a lasting peace that is not going to just last for a few years and then Russia does the same thing again like they did in Minsk 1 and Minsk 2. So let me know what you guys think about my comments here, but I really do hope that NATO takes a very decisive stance here and, you know, starts transferring some of its troops to Ukraine to liberate some of that pressure from other front lines that are currently not active. So with all that, guys, thank you so much for your support, and I will see you in the next one. Slava Ukraini!